We have Luke Tomlinson here with us today. We're going to sit down and have a chat. I'm going to dive in with how you fell into procurement. You started off in sales and accounts at RS, which was a 5-year journey there itself. How exactly did you get into procurement?
Looking for an apprenticeship, and I managed to get one in sales admin. On the side, I was doing a part-time degree in history and politics with the Open University. Got asked after a year if I'd be interested in joining the finance team. Did that for about 8 months. So I went to my manager at the time and I said, look, I'm really not enjoying this. I said, well, what are you interested in? At the time where I was, it was called commercial. It was basically procurement. So I interviewed for the vacancy. It was initially a 12-month sort of like fixed term. I ended up staying in the department for about four and a half years until I left.
And now you're rejoining RS again after all this.
RS is one of those companies that are organisations that has different operational companies. A lot of familiarity, a very different business model to where I was previously, so it'd be interesting.
I wanted to talk about ESG and sustainability. I noticed that's something you are passionate about. 95% of procurement leaders are looking to prioritise ESG in 2025. It's going to become a key metric for procurement to demonstrate success to the board. You've implemented ESG frameworks. What practical steps do you think teams should take to make sure that they're not just like ticking off a checkbox on a list, but actually genuinely driving impact and value?
I did a seminar recently with Gary Mander on ESG in the supply chain, and one of the topics we did cover was sustainability and greenwashing. The problem is at the moment, the regulation is almost non-existent for a lot of areas with ESG. Until there is regulation, and that'll probably come first, I'd imagine, in the public sector rather than the private sector. I could be wrong. As that rolls out, frameworks will become a bit more easier to sort of put in place. At the moment, the organisations that are doing it are the ones that genuinely want to, give that social impact. In terms of framework itself, and making sure that it is adding value. The bare basics need to be, does your company's value align with the other companies, not just on paper. This is where the human element of procurement comes in. When you're meeting a supplier and you're discussing and talking about strategy, I think you can genuinely get a sense of what they're about. You can usually suss out quickly if it's just a tick box exercise. It's not tangible, that sort of thing you need to see for yourself. In terms of like framework itself, at MS3 I've managed to put in place, working with the ESG and compliance officer, a scoring system. We asked for all the supporting documents, like all the EcoVadis ratings, everything we could. Basically did a full audit and then evaluated their ESG based on scores, and we separated by social value, by environment, by governance. So we went quite far into the governance as well, and even as to how is your board of directors compositioned, and do they get incentives for ESG related schemes. Our two core pieces of advice is that human element, making sure your partners' values align with your own, and then putting in place some sort of auditing measure, and if you can, an external auditor as well. It can be a bit costly for smaller businesses. It's probably the most impartial way of doing it.
On that note of making sure your suppliers align with your values, what about the suppliers that don't really understand the pressures you're facing? How would you go about building better relationships with them?
And if they don't understand your pressures, quite frankly, you're not talking to them enough. Or it might be that you're not communicating it in a way that they see as a priority to you. Make sure that they're aware that that's your priority. So that's holding your QBRs, that's holding, regular reviews and updates on whether it be ESG or, stock disruptions, whatever your priority is. Make sure that you keep it at the forefront of their mind in their conversations. Communication, it's an often overlooked thing, but as long as you keep that line of communication open, as long as you form, and something I always say is you form partnerships, not just transactional relationships, then you sound.
About transactional procurement. Now this is something that we should be moving away from, but it's something that procurement is often associated with. So what does a strategic function look like? What workflows should we be saying goodbye to?
It can be resource. If you've got a team of 3 or 4 and you're managing several £1 million spend, it can be difficult because then you turn more into a purchasing sort of transactional is you're buying stuff and you're getting stock in. Strategic procurement for me is you've got a long-term vision as far as you can, because obviously there's disruptions along the way. You've got a risk mitigation strategy, a supplier diversification. You've got strategic partners, not just relationships, and that involves for example, if you're in a B2B organisation, bringing your suppliers in, meeting your sales team, working with the end user. That's another way of being creative. It's working with people externally. That joint growth in the business. It's looking further into the future rather than just looking at the now. And I acknowledge it is really difficult. If you've got high workload, which a lot of people in procurement have, it is very difficult to look past, the next quarter or the next 6 months, because the workload can get so high. That's where it becomes transactional. And that's partially resource, but it's also prioritising its work. And it could be the partners you're working with. It could be the way you're doing things. Are you automating as much as you can to reduce that workload? There's stuff out there that can help automate, even in-house systems as well. It's just it's trying to be as efficient as possible. The more organisations lean into technology, to different ways of streamlining processes or removing processes if need be, I think that's where things will start. People will be able to look more into strategy. Everyone in procurement wants to be strategic.
A culture that prioritises people and communication, automation and tech where need be to improve process so that you can look beyond the next quarter and actually be strategic.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Luke, what excites you most about the future of procurement?
I think the world does need a bit, and especially, supply chain needs a bit of optimism at this point in time. There's a lot gone on in the last few years. Economically, for a lot of countries, it doesn't look too positive. There's two sides to it. On one hand, it's going to drive us to be more efficient. It's going to drive us. We've got to be reactive to demand, but we've also got to look at strategy now, because the world's a scary place economically at the moment. I find it exciting in the sense that it's going to force us to be a bit more creative and think of ways that we can create efficiency and navigate things. But technology seems exciting at the moment. 2025, I'm definitely going to try and educate myself on that, because playing into that's one of the key drivers that will keep us motivated and enable us to be more strategic, to mitigate some of that economic risk. But for me, I'm a people person. I think relying on tech to do all the boring stuff and streamline the repetitive stuff that you don't necessarily like doing, and the admin and stuff like that, it enables me to be with people more. It enables me to, and people in procurement who like that, to be more human.
Procurement and creativity, it often doesn't go hand in hand. Why do you think that creativity is such an important skill that procurement professionals should be looking at developing?
It is one of those professions where you don't, much like finance or other professions where you look at and you think that you wouldn't think it'd need it, but I think it does. Not in the form that I think the traditional form of creativity. It's more storytelling and getting that stakeholder buy-in. So I think you need to a degree, you need to animate yourself a bit. And I think telling that, like even speaking with suppliers, it's selling them an opportunity, it's selling them a story. And it all comes back, that creativity piece all comes back to that sort of people-centered department that procurement is. So yeah, I think it comes in many forms, but I think it's important to stay connected to people. To be honest, it's important to sort of tell that story and that wider strategic piece and get buy-in, essentially.
You currently balance a lot. Your career, fatherhood, being a content creator, being a part-time student as well. No easy feat. How exactly do you go along with balancing all of that?
with great difficulty.
That's the most honest, genuine answer I've heard.
I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is really difficult. My piece of advice would be self-discipline. I do find it really difficult. It does involve some late nights, and it does involve, prioritising. But I'd say it's prioritising and self-discipline, and it's not easy, but it is worth it. If that's, you need to ask yourself, is this really what I want to do? Will I get satisfaction from this? And if so, then yeah. So, for example, if it got to a point where I couldn't do my studying anymore and I wanted to spend more time with my daughter, I'd spend more time with my daughter. It's just checking in with yourself, making sure it's still right for you, and having that bit of self-discipline and routine. My daughter comes priority all the time. That's self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I tend to go through sprints of doing stuff. I think it's when you've got that creative flow, and it's similar for the studying really. If you're in that flow of things, and if it does mean spending a bit more time, staying up a little bit later, on that occasion, it's probably worth it because you're in the flow. You're going to get more productivity out of it than you are if you sat there procrastinating.
You're an avid fan of education, that you always put yourself in a position to learn. I've seen this across everything you've said so far. Well, that's a wrap for our conversation with Luke. Thank you so much for joining us today, Luke.
Thank you for having me.